What's going on, traders? We got a lot to talk about. You are not going to want to miss this. Before we start, like, subscribe, comment your thoughts below. Let's get into the video. So first things first, we got to talk about the VIX because the VIX is at a very critical spot here. And we talked about this in the last video on how institutions are loading up calls on the VIX. We saw the 18 strike, the 20 strike, the 27 strike. We even saw institutions loading up 29 strike calls for the month of March. And so this leads us to question, well, if institutions are expecting a huge spike on the VIX. What does that mean for the overall market? And we'll talk about that in a bit. But first, we got to look at the VIX and we got to look at the weekly time frame. And so, what's interesting here is that every time the VIX hits this trend line, we see a rejection towards the downside. You reject it here, you reject it here, you reject it here, you reject it here. And so, we go down to the daily time frame and right now, we are mounted right above that trend line. Not only are we mounted above the trend line, but we are mounted above the supply and demand zone. And so we talked about this before. Every time, at least for the past month or so, every time the VIX gets below or between 14 and 15, you see a bounce or a spike towards the upside. So here, for example, the VIX got as low as about 14.3, 14.2, gap towards the upside or bounce towards the upside. Here, same thing. Here, you saw the same thing. It got as low as about 14.8, 15, give or take, gap towards the upside. Here, you see the same thing. So you guys are getting the idea that every time the VIX gets between 15 and 14, you see a spike towards the upside. And so if we're looking at the SPY, I would argue that the SPY looks great for more upside, right? It does. I can't argue that. And so one thing we did see on Friday is that we were having a hard time holding above 610 on the SPY. Now, does that mean anything? No, it doesn't. I mean, we can just easily see this move continue next week. So it's very much possible. So what we want to see on the SPY is a break and hold above 610. And then we can start talking about crazy levels that everyone else is talking about, such as 630, right? And SPY can see a move towards 630. I can't argue against that as well. If you're talking about the weekly time frame on the SPY, you're looking at this massive rising wedge here. The top of this rising wedge is 630, right? So it's very much possible. But when you're looking at a smaller time frame here, so let's go back to the daily here. You're looking at a move towards 625 if you're talking about this much smaller rising wedge pattern. So what you want to see when it comes to the SPY is a break and hold above 610. I would argue and say 612. You see a break and hold, retest, you bounce towards the upside, and then you can start talking about those crazy levels such as 616, 620, 630, all that fun stuff. And then if we're talking about the top, we could be looking at moves towards the 630s. But something interesting happened Friday when it comes to the SPY right before close, or I wouldn't even say right before close. I believe this was like 10 minutes after close, guys. 10 minutes after close, institutions unloaded all of their calls, not all of their calls, but a good amount of calls, and you saw a slight increase in puts when it comes to the SPY. And so we look at the net flow for the SPY, and again, before close, you get a huge bearish spike on the SPY. Now, this was 10 minutes after close, but I keep saying before close. But just keep in mind that around close, institutions were loading up puts on the SPY. And so we look at these contracts and see and actually get a confirmation here. As you guys can see, the date is February 14th. That was a Friday. These were loaded up at 4:10, so 10 minutes after close, oddly enough. And then as you guys can see, you have a SPY, April 17, 2025, strike 580 puts, and then you scroll over here. So let's scroll over, and as you guys can see, the premiums are insane. You got 900K premium, 900K premium, 900K, so on and so forth. The sentiment is bearish. So some institutions is expecting a massive move towards the downside when it comes to the SPY, and the fact that these were loaded right after close is pretty suspicious, right? Now you can say, what if it's a hedge and all that fun stuff? But that is a lot of premiums for a hedge position. That's just me. Okay, maybe it's just me. Institutions they're balling out, whatever the case may be. So it could just be me, and maybe I'm just overthinking it. But again, I wouldn't take that lightly considering where the VIX is. Okay, I would not take those puts lightly considering where the VIX is. It's also important to note, and we talked about this in a video before, this position right here. Remember we talked about how institutions were loading up SPY puts for 579 strike? Well, the expiration for that is this upcoming week, this upcoming Friday, February 21st. Now, maybe they sold this position, maybe they already took profit, very much possible, but again, we want to be cautious and we want to take this seriously considering, once again, where the VIX is. All right. So I'm not full blown bearish or anything, and I'm not I mean, it's obviously, the market is bullish, right? But I'm not full blown bearish. I'm just urging caution here. Okay, I'm just urging caution because there's a lot going on in the background when it comes to institutions, and we're seeing a lot of selling happen in the background when it comes to these institutions. While retail traders are just constantly buying and buying and buying and buying and foaming at the mouth, right? So again, be cautious here. So when we're talking about downside when it comes to the SPY, your key levels here is 607, 605, and your main level of all is 598. We go to the 4-hour time frame and we talked about this level all the time. I know you guys are tired of it, but Wednesday we saw a massive, well not even a massive, but a pretty dramatic drop towards the downside, and we saw a retest of the 598 level, and bull stepped in and pretty much reclaimed that level, and then we saw a move back towards the upside. If you're new to the channel, every time we get below 598 we see a sell-off towards the downside, and a pretty dramatic sell-off towards the downside here. Jerome Powell sold off the market. We saw a move as low as 576 once we broke below 598. Same thing here. You retested 598. You broke towards 576. This gap fill right here. Same thing here. You got that DeepSeek AI news. You got towards the downside. You headed towards 594. So you guys get the idea. 598, pretty significant levels. So we look at the triple Qs. Triple Qs, you go to the weekly time frame, and I don't think I mentioned this on the SPY, but you're looking at, again, another massive rising wedge. And you're going to see this pattern everywhere. You rejected here, you rejected here, you bounced here, you bounced here. And so triple Qs, when you go to the daily time frame, you do have a little bit more upside if we're considering this rising wedge, right? This much smaller rising wedge. And so you could be looking at a move towards 542, 543. Highest we're looking at is about 545. But if we just so happen to break out of here for, whatever reason, because we do have, a few key events coming in this week. If you just so happen to break above this rising wedge, you could be talking about a move towards the 550s, 560s, right? So something to pay attention to when it comes to the triple Qs. Your key levels towards the downside, however, is 535. You get below 535, you're heading towards 533. After that, 530, 529, and then we'll talk about other levels once we get there, or if we get there. Okay, so that's what you want to be looking out for when it comes to the triple Qs. So one thing I want to talk about is Nvidia. So again, we look at this weekly time frame, another massive rising wedge pattern. So I would argue and say that something huge is coming. Okay, something huge is coming. No diddy, but something crazy is about to happen. I don't know what. What I can say is that what I think could potentially drop the market is inflation. Okay, the market cares about inflation. It doesn't seem to care about tariffs anymore. Trump just keeps, he's basically using tariffs as a trump card. No pun intended, but again, the market doesn't seem to care about tariffs anymore because it just seems, I guess the market is annoyed by it, right? It's pretty immune to it at this point, unless Trump says something absolutely crazy come Tuesday, because he is speaking Tuesday. I can't imagine what he could say that can possibly tank the market that revolves around tariffs, right? But Wednesday, right? Wednesday, we'll get into Nvidia in a bit. Wednesday, we do have FOMC minutes. 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So something you want to pay attention to. But when we're talking about Nvidia, I talked about this before, guys. Every time Nvidia gets above 140, you see a massive sell off. Okay, and I'm not being dramatic when I say massive sell off. So 140 is your key level, and I talked about this in multiple videos. We look at the monthly time frame. This first candle right here, this candle wicked all the way towards 140, and bear stepped in and sold off. Right, this candle here went all the way as high, or wicked as high as 144. Bear stepped in, sold us back below 140. Here, same thing. Went as high as about 152. Bear stepped in, broke us back below 140. Here, Nvidia made new highs towards 153. Bear stepped in, broke us back below 140. So all I'm saying is that if Nvidia gets above 140, don't be surprised if these silverback gorillas, these psychos, these foaming at the mouth bears, these cocaine bears, they just start, selling things off. Okay, so I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen. If we just so happen to break above these guys and stop them out of their position, then obviously Nvidia will squeeze high and we start looking at the move towards the 160s. But again, like I showed you guys on the monthly time frame, every time we get above 140, we break back below it. Okay, here, good example. We broke above 140. We headed as high as 153. That was a new high for Nvidia. And then that same day, Bear stepped in and broke us right back below 140. So again, If you get above 140, don't be surprised you wake up at a Diddy party. All right. So that's what I have for Nvidia. When it comes to upside, I do think it has more upside towards 143. If it gets above 140, there is room on the table for 150, but I would just be cautious above that 140 level. All right, simple as that. All right, so we look at Apple. So Apple's in a very interesting spot here. So you're looking at this again, you're on a weekly time frame. You have a rising wedge pattern. This pattern is everywhere, guys. Okay, I'm not forcing it. I mean, you see it here, rejected here, bounce, 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 then you broke down, and it looks like you're trying to retest the bottom of this rising wedge before potentially seeing another breakdown. But here, right now, Apple is at a supply and demand zone. Now, you are making a higher low here, so Apple can head much higher, and we can be talking about moves towards 260 if Apple gets above 250, right? But if Apple fails to get above 250 or even fails at this current supply and demand zone, you can start looking at a breakdown from this point on. We go to the daily time frame, and as you guys can see, we are breaking above a descending triangle. Now, if we just so happen to roll back into this descending triangle, I would say back below 230, 235 on Apple, then that's a very, very bad sign, and we can start looking at a move towards the low 200s on Apple, meaning that this descending triangle will start playing out. Okay. So something you want to pay attention to. If we're talking about the projected move for this rising wedge, you're looking at a move towards the 180s on Apple. And ironic enough, there's a gap all the way at the 180s for Apple. So something you want to pay attention to when it comes to Apple. Another interesting stock here is actually let's go over Tesla and then I'll talk about that stock. Tesla. I set this in the Discord. I don't think I posted in the community tab. I do post in the community tab, by the way. If you want, access to whatever I'm looking at. I post on our community tab, so turn on your notifications there. But Tesla, if Tesla gets above 360, is heading towards 375. 375 is right at the bottom of this descending triangle. All right. I don't think Tesla's done dropping. I think it still has more room to the downside, all the way towards 300. So you definitely want to pay attention to this thing. I definitely think Tesla can start heading towards the 300s after that retest of 375. So again, if it gets above 360, you're looking at a move towards 375. Can it hit towards this gap fill at around 400? Very much possible. If it mounts and hold above 400, you can be looking at a squeeze towards the upside. So am I counting on that? No, but it's very much possible. So 375, you definitely want to be careful at that 375 level. I think Tesla is not done dropping. As you guys can see, we broke back below this weekly trend right here. So I do think Tesla is heading towards a retest of this trend, if not the bottom of this ascending triangle. So pretty bearish on Tesla. TSM. So this is a very interesting semiconductor because this looks bearish. Okay, it does look bearish. I will say that much. It's breaking below this rising wedge pattern. Now you are forming a higher low here, so that is a good sign, and we could be looking at a move towards this gap fill at 220. But as long as we're below this rising wedge pattern, this thing can start heading towards the 180s. Now it did hold up 197, so that's obviously your key level here. So if TSM breaks below 200, your psych level, then you're looking at a move towards 197. After that, you're looking at a move back towards these guys here at around 190. So you really want to be careful with this thing. It looks okay for now, but if this tanks, it just makes you wonder what's going to happen to the rest of the semiconductor names. So something to pay attention to, something to take into consideration. That's pretty much all I have for TSM. Um, and so another thing I want to look at is Bitcoin. And granted, I don't have much for Bitcoin, but what I will say is that the longer Bitcoin does this, the bigger the upcoming move is going to happen. There's a massive move coming when it comes to Bitcoin. I don't know what direction. Me, I'm leaning more towards the downside because the fact that the market is breaking higher and Bitcoin's just sitting here, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a delayed move towards the upside. We'll see. But right now, whatever Bitcoin is doing, which is consolidating, obviously, but whatever it's waiting for is going to be a massive move to whatever direction, whether it's to the upside or to the downside. I can't say for sure, but as long as Bitcoin is trading between 99K and 92K, I don't really have much for it. But again, something's about to happen. Okay, something crazy is about to happen. Maybe Trump's speech, maybe that's what it's waiting for, and maybe Trump says something about crypto. Who knows? But definitely definitely want to keep an eye on Bitcoin. IWM, Russell. So the Russell Looks very interesting here. So you have a dark cloud cover, which is a bearish pattern here, but you go to the weekly time frame here. This little hammer pattern, this inverted hammer pattern, very interesting. Right here, you have the same exact pattern, and look what happened the following week. All right, so doesn't mean it has to play out this week, but you definitely want to pay attention to Russell, especially considering that it is having a hard time claiming 226. If the Russell gets above and holds above 226, then you're looking at a move towards 230. If it gets above 230, then you're going to start looking at some really crazy moves back towards the upside. You can start looking at a move towards 235. But right now, this is not a good sign. Especially considering that we do have FOMC minutes come Wednesday at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So you definitely want to pay attention to IWM. This thing is very news sensitive, it's very rate cut decision sensitive, it's very interest rate sensitive. This thing just that's all it moves off of. It doesn't move off much of anything else unless the market is dragging it in a direction. But that's what I have for IWM. If you're talking about the projected move for this rising wedge pattern and you're talking about this dark cloud cover playing out, you're looking at a move towards the 217s. Right? So that's what I'm looking at for IWM. And so, overall, the point in this video is to pretty much be cautious. Don't marry the upside until you get confirmation because I really don't like where the VIX is. I just don't. Okay. Um, again, every time, I mean, like clockwork, every time this thing gets around this range, you see it here clear as day, you get a spike towards the upside. I mean, is it a coincidence that Trump is speaking this upcoming week while the VIX is here? Is it a coincidence that we have FOMC minutes this upcoming week while the VIX is here? I don't know. You let me know in the comments below. But all I'm saying is that this can easily turn into some type of double bottom. Whether you believe the VIX can be plotted or not, it clearly follows a pattern. And right now, that pattern is every time I get between 15 and 14, I'm going to spike towards the upside. That's what the VIX does every single time. So, could you be looking at a double bottom pattern here? Very much possible. And if we're considering those institutions and what they're loading up on, um, this thing can go absolutely crazy. I mean, you're very illiquid towards 25, guys. Also, again, like I said before, this position right here could very much still be in play. All right. The open interest and volume on this position is still pretty decent. 579 puts for the SPY. Expiration is this Friday. So if the SPY does tank that low, don't say you weren't warned. All right. Considering where the VIX is this a coincidence? I don't know. You let me know in the comments below. But if you want access to our Discord link is in the description below. A few people have been killing it this past week, so congratulations to them. They've been killing it nonstop, honestly. I mean, this guy here, he's been going crazy. He traded Tulio earnings, I believe. I believe this was earnings. He did 120 puts, made 2K off that play. APP killed it on earnings as well, made another 2K. So yeah, been going crazy. So if you want access to our Discord, link is in the description below. I am considering raising the price just because I have a lot in this Discord, like a lot of value in this Discord, and it costs. All right. So other than that, let me know what you guys think. Do you think the market is going to tank? And if I'm overreacting about the VIX, do you think the SPY is going to head towards 630? Do you think the triple Qs is heading towards 580? I've seen people say that, okay, when they're talking about that inverse head and shoulders pattern and the measured move for that inverse head and shoulders pattern. It is a measured move towards 580, right? If you do the projected move for this inverse head and shoulders pattern. So do you think the Qs can head as high as 580?